They see Russia as a financial opportunity, which is strange because actually Russia has been, there for the pickings, for several decades. There have been a lot of U.S. investment in Russia. There have been other countries investing in Russia. Many of those investments have ended badly because Russia is not a country where there is rule of law. And so, contracts aren't respected. Deals are hard to keep. You don't want to go to a shareholders meeting when everybody else in the room is carrying machine guns. I remember an American investor saying that to me once. And so there are reasons why Russia is a difficult place to invest. I think what's been happening is that the Russians have been kind of dangling prizes in front of the Trump administration and offering special deals in an attempt to end U.S. support for Ukraine, and also, more importantly, from the Russian point of view, to divide America from Europe, to create a gap between America and its former allies, because that's good for Russia. Then Russia will have a freer hand on the continent if it wants it.
Yeah, that's Russia's perspective on this. I wonder about the cultural aspect of it as well, because Tucker Carlson has in the past gone to Russia and expounded on the cultural benefits of Russian society. And it does dovetail, Adam, with the cultural complaints that Donald Trump and his allies have with Europe right now.
Yeah, I think Donald Trump and his advisors view the ideal situation as a world composed of not democratic countries, but authoritarian ethno-states where each country has a particular ethnic group that is entitled to political and cultural hegemony within their own borders. And somewhat similar to the neocons they're constantly criticizing, they want to impose that kind of system on the rest of the world because they're worried that if the rest of the world doesn't adopt the same system as the United States, or is that they would like to impose in the United States a sort of ethno-state autocracy.
We need to talk about what's happening with Russia right now, because the Trump administration's posture toward Russia has become absolutely alarming. And I'm not being hyperbolic here. We're watching in real time as American foreign policy gets corrupted, as national security takes a backseat to personal profit, as alliances that kept the peace for 70 years get dismantled for the benefit of a few billionaires surrounding Donald Trump. Joining the discussion are Rick Stengel, MSNBC political analyst and former Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy in the Obama administration, Adam Serwer, staff writer for The Atlantic, and Anne Applebaum, also a staff writer for The Atlantic and one of the most important voices on authoritarianism and Eastern Europe. And what they're describing should terrify every American who cares about national security and global stability. By the way, I am trying to do my best to gather all the information I can for you and share it with you. Please leave your likes and comments, and I would be grateful if you subscribed. Let's continue. Let's start with the fundamental shift we're seeing. There was a birth of this new Russia posture in Trump's first administration, but he didn't get very far with it because there were still some guardrails, some people willing to push back, some institutional resistance. But in this second administration, those guardrails are gone. The resistance has been purged. And what's emerging is truly strange and deeply dangerous. Anne Applebaum lays it out perfectly. What's really strange about the administration's posture toward Russia is that all of the aggression from Russia, the cyber attacks, the political warfare, the games Russian and Chinese planes have played with American planes in airspace, the campaign of sabotage and military threats in Europe, the military invasion of Ukraine and other countries in the region, none of that seems to bother them anymore. It's as if they don't think that kind of threatening behavior will ever affect the United States. Think about what that means. Russia has been conducting cyber warfare against America for years. They've interfered in our elections. They've hacked our infrastructure. They've spread disinformation to divide our society. They've invaded sovereign nations. They've threatened NATO allies. They've engaged in political assassinations on foreign soil. And the Trump administration just doesn't care. They've decided all of that aggression is fine. Not worth responding to, not even worth acknowledging as a problem. But here's what Anne fears, and I think she's absolutely right. You now have an administration that isn't acting in the interest of Americans or American safety, but is interested rather in the personal wealth of some people around Donald Trump who are negotiating with the Russians and seeking to do separate deals with them. That appears to be the direction this is going. They see Russia as a financial opportunity. Let that sink in. The Trump administration sees Russia, a hostile foreign power that attacks us constantly, as a business opportunity, not as a national security threat, not as an adversary that needs to be contained, but as a place to make money. And that financial interest is driving American foreign policy in ways that directly contradict our national interests and endanger our security. Anne points out something crucial. This is strange because Russia has actually been there for the pickings for several decades. There's been lots of U.S. investment in Russia. Other countries have invested in Russia. Many of those investments have ended badly because Russia is not a country where there is rule of law. Contracts aren't respected. Deals are hard to keep. She quotes an American investor who once told her, "You don't want to go to a shareholders meeting when everybody else in the room is carrying machine guns." There are very good reasons why serious businesses and investors have learned to be extremely cautious about Russia. The corruption is endemic. The legal system is a joke. Property rights don't exist in any meaningful way. Putin and his oligarchs can seize whatever they want, whenever they want. It's a kleptocracy where the rules change based on who's in favor with the regime at any given moment. But the Trump administration apparently thinks they're special. They think they can cut deals that won't blow up in their faces like so many previous investments in Russia. Or more cynically, they don't care if the deals blow up as long as they can extract some personal profit in the short term before it all falls apart. The national interest doesn't matter. American security doesn't matter. What matters is whether Trump and his cronies can make money. Anne explains what's really happening. The Russians have been dangling prizes in front of the Trump administration and offering special deals in an attempt to end U.S. support for Ukraine. And more importantly, from the Russian point of view, to divide America from Europe, to create a gap between America and its former allies, because that's good for Russia. If America abandons Europe, Russia will have a freer hand on the continent to do whatever it wants. This is classic Russian strategy. They've been trying to break apart NATO and the transatlantic alliance for decades. They see American power and the unity of democratic nations as the primary obstacle to their ambitions. So they work constantly to create divisions, to undermine trust, to make America question its commitments. And now they've found a president and an administration willing to do exactly what Russia wants in exchange for some business deals. But there's also a cultural aspect to this that's deeply disturbing. Tucker Carlson went to Russia and came back expounding on the cultural benefits of Russian society. He did propaganda for Putin, talking about how great Moscow is, how the grocery stores are better than America, how Russian civilization is superior. It was embarrassing bootlicking of an authoritarian regime, and it dovetails perfectly with the cultural complaints Trump and his allies have about Europe right now. Adam Serwer explains the ideology behind this. Donald Trump and his advisors view the ideal situation as a world composed not of democratic countries, but of authoritarian ethnostates, where each country has a particular ethnic group entitled to political and cultural hegemony within their own borders. Somewhat similar to the neocons who wanted to spread democracy, Trump and his people want to impose this system of ethnostate autocracy on the rest of the world because they're worried that if the world doesn't adopt the same system they're trying to create in the United States, their domestic project will be endangered. So they're using American influence to pressure Europe to behave the same way the Trump administration is behaving, to abandon democracy, to embrace authoritarianism, to organize society around ethnic nationalism rather than universal rights and democratic values. This is a complete inversion of what American foreign policy has been for 75 years. We used to promote democracy and human rights. Now, we're actively trying to undermine them. Adam points out the obvious problem. You can't control how people will react. American pressure on Europe to adopt authoritarianism isn't necessarily going to result in Europe submitting to Trump. That was the lesson neocons learned the hard way when they tried to impose democracy at gunpoint in different parts of the world. You can't just force other countries to adopt your preferred system through threats and pressure. But what's the Trump administration's complaint with the past 70 years of alliances? There's been prosperity globally. People have been lifted out of poverty. Democratic values have spread. Free trade has created wealth. the longest period of great power peace in human history. What's the supposed drawback that necessitates abandoning our allies in Europe? Rick Stengel explains it in terms of the ideological split in foreign policy. There's been this long-time continuum between realism and idealism. American idealism started with Woodrow Wilson and carried through the last 75 years, where we helped rebuild Europe after World War II. Realists believed we were too idealistic, helping foreign countries too much while not doing enough at home. That's a perfectly legitimate worldview to debate. But this current administration, as Adam and Anne have both said, has this ethno-nationalism, this economic agenda, where they see places like Russia as a gigantic vacant lot they can develop and sell. They look at those 75 years where we helped the world become prosperous, which has helped us tremendously, as the U.S. being a sucker. Trump has said over and over that all these other countries take advantage of us, but that's completely backwards. We helped them become prosperous, which made us more prosperous. We created a stable international order that allowed global trade to flourish, which benefited American businesses and workers enormously. We built alliances that prevented major wars, saving countless lives and trillions in military spending. The post-war international order wasn't charity. It was enlightened self-interest, and it worked spectacularly well for America and the world. The Trump administration just doesn't see it that way. They view international relations as pure zero-sum competition, where if someone else is doing well, America must be losing. They can't comprehend mutual benefit or positive sum outcomes. They think stability and prosperity are for suckers, and that what really matters is dominating others and extracting wealth. So how does Venezuela factor into this worldview? We see what they're calling an ideological approach to the hemisphere, but Venezuela doesn't seem to fit any coherent framework. Rick Stengel has the answer, and it's frustrating because we all look for consistency in foreign policy, but there isn't any. It's all about the whims of Donald Trump. What they're doing to Venezuela is like the guy who punches out the weak kid on the playground to show he's tough and intimidate everybody else. There's no rhyme or reason with a larger policy idea. Spending $1 billion sending ships to Venezuela to intimidate this tiny country that wasn't really a major drug transit point makes no sense from a strategic perspective. But it makes perfect sense if you understand Trump's psychology and his need to look tough by bullying smaller countries. But let's try to put a coherent frame on it anyway, because that's what we do as analysts. Could you argue this is about spheres of influence? America has its sphere here in the Western Hemisphere. Russia has its sphere, including a good portion of Europe potentially, and China has the East. Anne Applebaum shoots that down immediately. What you just described, this 3 spheres of influence model, is a Russian idea. It's been circulating in Russian propaganda and far-right propaganda in the United States for a long time. There are enormous problems with that framework. One, the old sphere of influence form of foreign policy is what got us into massive world wars. 2, the U.S. has huge interests globally, and our relationship with Europe is critically important economically. It's important for American prosperity and global stability. Leaving Europe to Russia, allowing Russia to conquer Europe, is not intelligent and not good for the United States. It's an old-fashioned way of seeing the world that doesn't reflect modern realities at all. We live in a globalized, interconnected world where what happens in Europe directly affects America. You can't just draw lines on a map and say each great power gets their sphere and everyone stays in their lane. That's not how the modern world works. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte understands this perfectly. He recently gave a stark warning. He said we need to be ready because conflicts are no longer fought at arm's length. Conflict is at our door. Russia has brought war back to Europe, and we must be prepared for the scale of war our grandparents and great-grandparents endured. That lines up exactly with what Anne was saying. The last time we had a spheres of influence world order, we got multiple world conflicts, including 2 catastrophic world wars. Rutte is warning the continent that Russia has no intention of staying within its borders. Putin wants to rebuild the Russian Empire. He sees NATO and the EU as obstacles to be destroyed. And if America abandons Europe, if we go back to spheres of influence, we're setting the stage for another massive European war. Adam Serwer brings it back to the fundamental point. If you look at the behavior of the Trump administration, there is a certain logic to it. It may seem inconsistent, but what they're concerned about is making sure Donald Trump profits from his office in whatever way he wishes, whether that's bullying smaller countries so he can feel like a tough guy or engaging in corruption that subordinates American interests to his own pocketbook. The power of the U.S. government is now serving one particular man and his family and his allies and cronies rather than serving the public. That's what this is all about. Not grand strategy, not realism versus idealism, not spheres of influence or ethnic nationalism or any of the intellectual frameworks we might use to try to understand it. It's about Trump making money and feeling powerful. Russia is offering business deals, so Trump abandons Ukraine and weakens NATO. Venezuela is small and weak, so Trump bullies them to look tough. Europe criticizes Trump's authoritarianism, so he threatens to abandon our oldest and most important allies. Every decision flows from Trump's personal interests and emotional needs, not from American national interests. And the scary thing is, Russia understands this perfectly. Putin has been cultivating Trump for years. He knows Trump is motivated by money, ego, and a desire to be seen as powerful. So Russia dangles financial opportunities, flatters Trump, treats him like a strong leader, and in return gets everything they want. The weakening of NATO, the abandonment of Ukraine, the division of America from Europe, the undermining of democracy globally. China is watching and learning the same lessons. If you want to manipulate American foreign policy, don't appeal to American interests or values. Appeal to Trump personally. Offer him business deals, flatter his ego, and he'll give you whatever you want. That's not how a superpower should operate. That's not how you maintain global leadership and security. That's how empires fall. The Russians have been explicit about their strategy. They want a multipolar world where America's power is diminished. They want to break up NATO. They want Europe weakened and divided. They want democracy discredited. And they've found the perfect useful idiot in Donald Trump who will help them achieve all of that while thinking he's getting great deals. The cultural aspect makes it even worse. The Tucker Carlsons of the world going to Moscow and praising Russian society, claiming they're more traditional and moral than decadent democratic societies. This plays into a narrative that authoritarianism is actually preferable to democracy, that strongman rule is more stable and effective than messy democratic governance, that ethnic nationalism is more natural than multicultural democracy. It's all propaganda, of course. Russia is deeply corrupt, economically stagnant, suffering from massive alcoholism and health problems, depopulating because people are fleeing. But the propaganda works on people who are already inclined toward authoritarianism, who already believe democracy has failed, who already want a strong man to make decisions for them. And Trump and his advisors are trying to impose that vision globally. They want a world of authoritarian ethnostates because that legitimizes what they're building in America. If democracy is failing everywhere, if authoritarianism is ascendant globally, then what they're doing domestically looks less like destroying American democracy and more like adapting to global trends. But it's based on a complete lie. Democracy isn't failing globally. Authoritarianism isn't ascendant. What's happening is that authoritarian leaders are working together to undermine democracy, and they've temporarily gained influence in some places, including the United States. But that doesn't make it inevitable or preferable or the wave of the future. The post-war international order, for all its flaws, created unprecedented peace and prosperity. It prevented great power wars. It spread democracy and human rights. It lifted billions out of poverty. It created the conditions for global cooperation on challenges like climate change and pandemics. And Trump wants to tear it all down for some shady business deals with Russian oligarchs and the ego boost of playing strongman. Anne Applebaum is right to fear where this is heading, an administration that prioritizes personal wealth over American security, that sees hostile foreign powers as business opportunities rather than threats, that abandons allies and embraces adversaries, that undermines democracy globally while building authoritarianism at home. This is how alliances collapse. This is how wars start. This is how empires fall. Mark Ruta's warning about preparing for the scale of war our grandparents parents endured should chill everyone. He's not being hyperbolic. He's looking at Russian aggression, American abandonment, European division, and seeing the same patterns that led to catastrophic wars in the past. And he's trying to prepare Europe for what might be coming. Because if America isn't going to defend the international order, if we're going to abandon our allies and cut deals with authoritarian rivals, someone has to step up. Europe needs to rearm. NATO needs to prepare for war without American support. Democratic nations need to band together without American leadership. That's the world Trump is creating. And it's not just bad for Europe. It's catastrophic for America. We built that post-war order because it served our interests. We created NATO because it prevented Soviet domination of Europe, which would have been terrible for us. We supported democracy because democratic nations are more stable partners and less likely to go to war. We built alliances because collective security is cheaper and more effective than trying to dominate the world alone. All of that is being thrown away for business deals that will probably fail, for flattery from dictators, for the ego of one man who can't see past his own immediate interests. And we'll all pay the price when the international order collapses, when wars break out, when the global economy contracts, when authoritarian powers feel emboldened to settle scores and seize territory. Rick Stengel, Anne Applebaum, and Adam Serwer are sounding the alarm. They're warning us exactly what's happening and where it's leading. The question is whether enough Americans are listening, whether Congress will push back, whether our institutions can constrain Trump's worst impulses before it's too late. Because once alliances break, they're hard to rebuild. Once wars start, they're hard to stop. Once democracy falls, it's hard to restore. And once authoritarian powers sense weakness and division among democracies, they move aggressively to exploit it. That's where we are. That's what's happening right now. And the consequences will be measured in lives lost, freedoms destroyed, and an international order that took 75 years to build but only a few years to tear down.